Welcome back to this edition of Insights. I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. And Tim, we kind of left the last break with this idea of, can the governments be really checking these big multi-international companies if they're the ones influencing them?
Right. I think under the pre-Trump notion, it's the idea, the criticism is that government wasn't checking industry and holding people like him to pay taxes or get rid of these loopholes that are part of our problem here. And then you've got the corporate inversions, companies like Burger King selling themselves out to a Canadian company to pay Canadian taxes, and you've got the offshoring of resources or the offshoring of labor to reduce costs for corporations and increase profits, and Trump's trying to counteract this using national policy. And I don't doubt that that'll work, but now you've got the flip side of this, okay, the critique that government isn't checking and balancing corporations, but then you look at the nature of his cabinet, and his cabinet is filled with these corporations and Wall Street and the billionaires. Will they check themselves, or will they start reducing taxes? They may clean up the loopholes, it'll be cleaner, but is it going to actually reconcile the books? And Trump, with all of his talk about infrastructure development, is at odds with his own party. That's no surprise. So, are we going to gain any headway in fiscal solvency for our national fiscal health when corporations become embedded in the very institutions that are meant to facilitate but also check whether they're being corrupt or potentially destructive to the national health and welfare, even though we all phrase everything in patriotic terms. I think herein lies the crux of the dualities that we're facing here.
And I kind of want to transition towards the Donald Trump's movement. It's been kind of labeled as a populist movement or populism in general. So I don't think the general public necessarily grasps what that means.
No, I mean, we kind of have a sense, populism, the root word is population, the populace becoming riled up and engaging in politics. And this is not the first time this has happened in our country. And there's some interesting insights to glean from the past experiences with it. As much as people are saying this is unprecedented and Trump is saying this is unprecedented, that's unprecedented, it's really not. The slogans are being used for at least the second time, and the experience that we're going through in many respects, they're different actors, different dynamics, but the general trajectory and the calculus here is very similar. And it reflects on what I just said. The first populist era we had was at the turn of from the 19th century into the 20th century. It was during the heyday of the great industrialization. Corporations had monopolies. They were controlling government. They were embedded in government. And the general population was angry about this. Farmers, in particular, were the group. Today, it's post-industrial, non-skilled labor that's replacing the farmers. But the farmers were up in arms, and they were leaning generally towards a left side of populism on the political spectrum. This time, Bernie was that option in this scenario. This time, I think this particular population of populists, the white male industrial worker that Trump is talking about being left behind, rightfully so, they bought into that side, the more capitalist right side of the political spectrum. And they're jockeying. They're, in a way, using their popular pressure, albeit slim, but effective in influencing this election by surprise to everyone. They're jockeying to get the system to respond to them. The question is Trump playing a sort of a game, or is it real? And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
And historically speaking, the Democratic Party was always kind of the working class party or something like that. Why do you think that shift was when they had an option like Bernie Sanders, who was working for unions and workers like that? Why did they think they went to the right?
Well, I don't think they did until it was clear that he didn't get the nomination in the Democratic Party, which begs the question, where has the Democratic Party gone? Has it gone center? And I think a lot of people saw Hillary as, what's the difference? Why not just elect a Republican? because she has had to play the politics towards center because the spectrum in many ways has shifted right, particularly in reaction to Obama for whatever reason. So there's a very, very tight tug of war here. And it shows that our spectrum is not as broad as the global spectrum, where we see this playing out in dramatic form in those Latin American republics or in the great debates of Europe between the former East Bloc and the West Bloc, and then within the now Western European countries in terms of these multifaceted parties that have to form coalitions from dramatic ends of the political spectrum. Our spectrum is not that broad, so our tug of war is much tighter. And therefore, we probably get all these antics being played in our politics. But I think looking back to this earlier populist movement and understanding that populism comes itself in various forms on the left side of the spectrum, on the right side of the spectrum. And I think what we're seeing is a certain sliver of our society using the right side of the spectrum when there was an option here to shake things up. To hopefully see this as an opportunity to pull the system to respond to them. If it doesn't, who knows where this populist sentiment will go. Now, historically, there was a simultaneous movement occurring, the progressive movement, which was the more, that also came in various forms, but these were the urban populations, middle-class Americans, demanding more say in their government. You might parallel this to the Women's March, a much more voluminous movement, broader spectrum. Granted, it's women, but they were representing so many different interests, and a reaction to a trajectory of populism that is potentially, well, it's confusing, first of all. It's the rhetoric is not jibing with action, and there's intentional and unintentional confusion there in the politics. But I think a lot of people can see where this could potentially go, and that is oligarchy, a rule of the extremely wealthy who are already controlling so much, but having totally embedded now. And will they look out for themselves, or will they really look out for the America first that Trump wants us to believe he's looking out for?
And this populist movement, I feel like a lot of times when you hear about it, it has a negative connotation with that. And do you think that's warranted?
That the populism has a negative connotation? Yeah. Well, it's scary for everyone, because does it deteriorate into the revolutionary, destabilizing forces that we see in Latin American republics that any good conservative would just be freaked out by? But I don't even know if we have conservatism in this country anymore, really, because so much of our politics is so radicalized for political gain, when in fact it's not realistic. It's not the reality. We overstate things. We're blowing things out of proportion. We're lying. We're flat out lying to one another. This is dangerous. And populism it's been put down historically by military forces, because the powers that be are not about to risk losing control or to the masses, or any segment of the masses.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. So Tim, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
It's some fascinating stuff. If you want to learn more, join us at next week's Insights, same time, same place.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.